Alexander Walker was a name synonymous with success in the business world. At 38, he had built a tech empire that made him millions, but it had also cost him what mattered most: time. To Alexander, every minute was valuable, and the pressure of running a multinational company left no room for distractions. Unfortunately, one of those distractions was his 3-year-old son, Lucas. Lucas was a sweet boy, but felt his father's absence deeply. Every moment with Alexander was brief, full of interruptions, and felt more like an obligation than a chance to bond. Whenever Lucas tried to talk or show his new toy, Alexander's eyes were glued to his phone or laptop, checking emails or handling urgent business messages. "Later, Lucas." "Daddy's busy," he would say, almost automatically. These words became a constant in the boy's life, and Lucas's bright eyes began to dim each time he heard them. Martha, the family's housekeeper, was more than just an employee. She had been with them since Lucas's birth, and, after the sudden death of Alexander's wife, had become a mother figure to the boy. Martha had immense love for Lucas, and though she respected Alexander, she was growing increasingly frustrated with how he neglected his son. One morning, while setting the breakfast table, Martha saw Lucas sitting silently, staring at his dad's empty chair. Alexander had left early for an important meeting and hadn't even said goodbye to the boy. Martha sat next to Lucas and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "He'll be back soon, sweetheart," she said softly. But inside, she was angry. This had gone on long enough. That evening, when Alexander returned home late, Martha was waiting for him in the living room. Her serious expression was a clear sign that she wasn't going to let this slide anymore. "Mr. Walker, we need to talk," she began, her voice calm but filled with determination. Alexander, exhausted, dropped his briefcase and rubbed his temples. "Martha, not now. I'm tired. It's been a long day." "Tired?" she shot back, her frustration finally breaking through. "What about Lucas? He's tired too. Tired of waiting for you, of missing you. That boy lost his mother, and now it seems like he's losing his father too." Those words hit Alexander harder than he expected. He knew he was neglecting Lucas, but he always justified it by telling himself it was all for a greater cause, to ensure his son would never have to worry about anything in the future. But in that moment, something made him stop and think. Martha continued, without sugarcoating anything. "He needs you, Alexander. Not your money, not your gifts. He needs you to be there. He's only 3 years old. Every time you walk out the door without looking at him, a piece of that boy dies a little." Alexander sighed, feeling the weight of her words. He knew Martha was right, and it tore him up inside. "I know I haven't been the father I should be, but—" "Work," he started, but Martha cut him off. "Work will be there tomorrow, but your son might not be waiting anymore. He misses his mother, and you're not filling that gap." Martha softened her voice, but her tone remained firm. "I know it's hard, Alexander, but being a father is more than making sure he has a good school or expensive toys. He needs you." Those words lingered in Alexander's mind for days. Finally, after much reflection, he decided he needed to change. He wanted to reconnect with Lucas, and he knew work couldn't be his top priority anymore. That's when he came up with the idea of taking a trip with his son. A vacation cruise would be the perfect opportunity to spend quality time with Lucas, away from phones and meetings. He planned everything carefully and shared the news with Martha. She was relieved to see that Alexander was finally trying to make a change. Lucas, when he heard about the cruise, was overjoyed, his sadness quickly replaced with childlike excitement. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. But then, on the day they were supposed to leave, Alexander's phone rang. It was a call he couldn't ignore. A crucial meeting for the expansion of his company had been scheduled. It was the biggest opportunity of his career so far. His partner could handle it, but Alexander, being a control freak, preferred to manage everything personally. When Martha found out he was going to delay the trip again, the tension returned. "You can't do this again, Alexander. Lucas is counting on you." But Alexander, still stuck in his controlling ways, decided he would meet them in Paris a few days later. Frustrated and disappointed, Martha took Lucas and left for the cruise without him, with the promise that Alexander would join them later. The ship sailed without Alexander. Although Lucas was excited about the trip, he couldn't hide the sadness of not having his father by his side. Martha did her best to distract the boy with all the cruise activities, swimming, games, and nightly shows, but there was something no amount of fun could fix. Lucas had waited so long to be with his dad, and once again, Alexander had let him down. Martha's comforting words, though sincere, couldn't fill the emptiness Lucas felt. Meanwhile, Alexander was in the middle of one of the most important meetings of his career. He tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting to the cruise. He knew he had made the wrong choice, but at the same time, he felt it was necessary to secure Lucas's future. If I don't do this now, I might not be able to give him the life he deserves, he thought, almost as if trying to convince himself. But Martha's words echoed in his mind. Would Lucas still be waiting for him? The meeting ended successfully, but the victory felt hollow. While his partners celebrated, Alexander only felt a growing emptiness. He isolated himself in his office, staring at the cruise ticket still sitting on his desk. He should have been on the ship, laughing with Lucas, showing him the ocean, and enjoying their time together. But once again, work had come first. A few days later, Alexander packed his bags, preparing to fly to Paris, where he would meet Martha and Lucas. He had made promises to himself. Once he arrived, nothing would come between him and his son. They would have time together on the return cruise, and he would make up for the lost moments. This was his chance to be the father Lucas deserved. But fate had other plans. On the morning of his flight to Paris, Alexander received a call that made his heart stop. On the other end, a nervous and trembling voice informed him, "Mr. Walker, there's been a storm on the cruise. Some people fell overboard and we haven't been able to locate Martha and Lucas." For a moment, Alexander froze. It felt unreal, like a nightmare he hoped to wake up from any second. He repeated Lucas's name to himself, as if saying it could somehow deny what he had just heard. No, this can't be happening. It can't be true. The next few minutes were a blur. Alexander could hardly breathe. He immediately called for his private jet and ordered it to take him to the accident site. The cruise was about 250 miles offshore, and rescue teams were racing against time trying to find the missing passengers. Alexander couldn't forgive himself. All he could think about was the broken promise to Lucas. He should have been there. He should have been the father Lucas needed. During the flight, Alexander tried to stay composed, but inside the panic grew. He called the best rescue experts and offered an outrageous sum of money to send more search teams. He would do whatever it took to find Lucas. The guilt consumed him like an unrelenting fire, burning away every shred of hope he tried to hold on to. Martha's words about how he was losing his son now seemed like a cruel prophecy. Upon arriving at the coast, Alexander was met by Coast Guard officials who explained the details. The cruise had encountered a sudden storm, and amidst the chaos, several passengers, including Lucas and Martha, had fallen into the sea. Rescue teams had been searching for hours, but the storm was making operations extremely difficult. The following days were the most agonizing of Alexander's life. He followed every movement of the search, but time seemed to work against him. Each new morning brought the terrible uncertainty of whether his son was still alive. He couldn't eat, sleep, or think of anything else. In his mind, there was only the image of Lucas, small and helpless, lost in the vast ocean. "It's my fault," he muttered repeatedly to himself. "If I had gone with them, if I had been the father he needed, none of this would have happened." Guilt intertwined with despair, and Alexander was on the verge of an emotional collapse. Every day, he pressured the rescue teams to keep searching, no matter the cost. But the news remained the same. There were no signs of Martha or Lucas. A week after the accident, the search began to wind down. Authorities suggested calling off the operation, as the chances of finding survivors were slim. But Alexander refused to accept that possibility. He increased the financial rewards even more, desperately trying to keep any hope alive, no matter how small. The thought of never seeing his son again was simply unbearable. Meanwhile, on a quiet beach miles away, something extraordinary was about to happen. Claire, a hardworking woman juggling 2 jobs, was enjoying her usual morning walk along the shore before starting another long day. The sea that day seemed calm, but something in the distance caught her eye. A yellow life jacket was drifting near the water's edge, gently swaying with the waves. Worried, she rushed over, thinking someone might be in trouble. As she got closer, her heart raced. A boy was lying on the sand, disoriented, trembling and murmuring incoherently. Claire knelt beside him, her heart aching. "Hey, are you okay? What's your name?" The boy looked up at her with wide eyes, but he couldn't say anything coherent. He was confused and exhausted. Claire knew she had to act fast. Without hesitation, she picked the boy up in her arms and ran towards the small village where she lived. The search efforts continued, but each new day without answers felt like a brutal blow to Alexander's soul. He spent hours by the coast, staring at the horizon, hoping for a miracle. The waves gently broke on the shore, but inside him, the storm of guilt and despair still raged with full force. He clung to hope, though it seemed like a distant reflection. Lucas and Martha had been missing for days, and the vast ocean seemed to have swallowed his son and any chance of redemption. The news outlets still reported on the disaster. The headlines mentioned the tech magnate Alexander Walker, who spared no expense to fund rescue teams, pouring a fortune into efforts to save his son. However, no amount of money seemed enough to conquer the relentless power of the sea. Each day, divers and helicopters returned with the same grim report. No sign of Lucas or Martha. Emotionally drained, Alexander wandered in circles, replaying the same words in his mind. If only I had gone with them. The image of Lucas, smiling in anticipation of a vacation that never happened, haunted him. This was supposed to be his chance to reconnect with his son. He had promised himself it would be different, but once again, work had taken priority. Now, all those promises seemed hollow and distant, dissolved in the merciless waters that separated Alexander from his son. Amidst this emotional chaos, a difficult decision loomed. The Coast Guard officials began suggesting that the rescue operation be called off. There was no longer any hope of finding survivors. The weather conditions had been severe, and too much time had passed since the disappearance. Still, Alexander refused to accept this. He hired private specialists, brought in new search vessels, and even consulted international teams. Yet none of it bore fruit. Across the country, in a small seaside village, Claire's life was taking an unexpected turn. She had found the boy on the beach, unaware of how this moment would change her life. The boy, who appeared to be around 3 years old, was dehydrated and in shock. He could barely speak, and when he tried, his words came out fragmented and confused. Claire rushed him to the local health clinic, where doctors confirmed that he was disoriented, likely due to severe trauma. In the first few days, Lucas, though Claire had begun calling him that, did not say his real name. He responded to her kindness with silent gazes, but it was clear something terrible had happened. His silence and lack of memory left Claire without any clues to find the boy's family. Still, she didn't give up. She went to the police, made announcements, and placed notices in small local papers, hoping someone would claim the boy. Days passed without any response. Claire, who already juggled 2 exhausting jobs, began feeling the impact of Lucas's presence in her life. Taking care of a child demanded time and attention she wasn't used to giving. She had to quit one of her jobs to be more present, ensuring the boy got the care he needed. As bills piled up, Claire's life became even more challenging, yet she didn't hesitate. As she cared for Lucas, Claire grew more attached to the lost boy. She saw fragility in him, fear, but also an emerging strength. Slowly, Lucas began to smile again, playing with the few toys Claire could afford. She taught him small values, showing him that even with little, life could be full of love and hope. Claire, a hardworking and generous woman, began to feel that Lucas's arrival wasn't a burden, but an unexpected blessing. However, Claire knew it wasn't her responsibility to keep the boy forever. She continued to search for clues about Lucas's family, asking around in nearby towns, talking to locals, but made no progress. Lucas, still confused, couldn't remember any details about his past, and all attempts to jog his memory were in vain. Despite the difficulties, Claire decided to move forward. She adopted Lucas in her heart, even though the future remained uncertain. From that moment on, he became her priority. Claire knew she would have to make sacrifices, But the bond she was forming with Lucas motivated her to be the mother he needed at that moment, even though life had taken her by surprise. Meanwhile, back in New York, Alexander received the devastating news. The official search was being called off. With no options left and a shattered heart, he finally agreed to stop the operation. But something inside him broke. The void left by Lucas was a wound he knew would never heal. Feeling more alone than ever, Alexander left the shore with the painful certainty that he had lost his son forever. Claire was used to a simple but exhausting routine. Every morning before facing her long workdays, she made sure to take a walk along the beach. The gentle sound of the waves calmed her and helped prepare her for the challenges ahead. But that day, something different awaited her. As she walked, her eyes caught sight of something unusual in the distance, a life jacket bobbing in the tide. Curious and concerned, she approached. As she got closer, her heart stopped. Lying on the sand was a small boy, pale with trembling lips. He looked disoriented, lost in his own world. Claire quickly knelt down, trying to assess the situation. "Hey, sweetheart, are you okay?" she asked, her voice full of concern. The boy didn't respond right away. His eyes wandered, confused, and he mumbled words Claire couldn't understand. She knew she had to act quickly. Without hesitation, she scooped the boy up in her arms and rushed to the nearest village, where there was a small medical clinic. There, the nurses confirmed that he was in shock, dehydrated, and clearly traumatized. The boy couldn't remember his own name or how he had ended up on that beach. The entire situation was a mystery. In the days that followed, Claire did everything she could to find the boy's family. She went to the local police station, made announcements, posted flyers, and even asked for help on social media. But no one came forward. There were no clues about his identity, and the boy remained unable to give any information. With each passing day, the bond between Claire and the boy grew stronger. She called him Lucas, unaware that this was, in fact, his real name. Lucas seemed to accept the name naturally, as if, even without memories, it was a part of who he was. Caring for Lucas turned Claire's life upside down. She had already struggled to balance 2 jobs and pay the bills, and now she had to make sacrifices. She decided to quit one of her jobs to dedicate more time to the boy, which meant giving up a significant portion of her income. The challenges mounted, but Claire never hesitated. Something about the bond she formed with Lucas made her believe he was there for a reason, and she was determined to be the mother he needed, even if she didn't know how long he would stay. Lucas, in turn, began showing signs of recovery. In the first few days, he was quiet, scared, and withdrawn. But with Claire's love and patience, the boy slowly began to smile again. His eyes, once distant, now reflected curiosity and at times a glimmer of happiness. Claire involved him in simple activities like walks along the beach and playing with the few toys she had at home, and Lucas responded to her affection with sincere warmth. However, Claire knew there was more behind Lucas's silence. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night crying, trapped in nightmares he couldn't escape. It was clear that he carried deep traumas, and Claire knew that somewhere, someone was likely searching for him. Still, each day that passed without answers made her feel that Lucas was becoming a permanent part of her life. Despite the uncertainty, Claire began creating a routine for them. Lucas accompanied her in her daily tasks, and gradually, the village embraced him as part of the community. He became known as the boy from the beach, but to Claire, he was much more. He had transformed her life, giving her a sense of purpose she hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, the pain of loss in New York still haunted Alexander. He had bitterly accepted the end of the search, but the emotional scar left by the accident would never fade. The weight of regret suffocated him every day. No matter how hard he tried to distract himself with work, nothing could fill the void left by Lucas. He had everything materially, but he had lost what mattered most: the chance to be a present father. Claire and Lucas's life moved forward despite the challenges. Unbeknownst to her, she carried with her a piece of a much larger story. The boy she had rescued on the beach wasn't just a stranger. He was the missing link that Alexander had been desperately searching for, though fate had yet to reveal its hand. But that truth would eventually come to light, and when it did, everything would change. Back in New York, Alexander's life was never the same. The tragedy on the cruise not only took his son and Martha from him, but also stripped him of his purpose. Before, work had defined him, but now guilt consumed him at every moment. Despite all his success and fortune, Alexander couldn't escape the suffocating feeling that he had failed where it truly mattered, being a present father for Lucas. Days passed slowly, but the pain remained raw and relentless. Alexander tried to keep his routine, burying himself in work, meetings, and business, but everything felt hollow. Nothing made sense anymore. He watched his employees celebrate corporate victories, while his mind drifted to the last time he had seen Lucas, just before the boy boarded the cruise. The image of his son's disappointed face, hearing that Alexander couldn't join them, tormented him, replaying like an endless movie in his mind. "I should have gone with him," Alexander muttered to himself every night as he stared at the empty ceiling of his luxurious apartment. The guilt gnawed at his soul, as if it had been he who had pushed Lucas into that terrible fate. The storm at sea may have been unpredictable, but the distance between him and his son wasn't. That was the result of his choices, and Alexander knew it. Each morning he woke with the same feeling of failure, searching for some reason to keep going. The man who once controlled everything around him now felt powerless in the face of life. His tech empire grew more each day, but business success only served as a reminder of his inability to control what mattered most, his own family. Without any hope, Alexander hired private investigators in a desperate attempt to find some solution, no matter how improbable. He clung to the faintest hope that a miracle might happen. Deep down, he knew it was a futile search. The rescue teams had done all they could, and the storm on the cruise had been unforgiving. Yet, he persisted, as if continuing to search could somehow ease his pain. Alexander's home, vast and silent, mirrored his isolation. Once he saw it as a symbol of his success, but now every empty room only magnified Lucas's absence. The small bedroom he had prepared for his son would never be filled with the laughter and play he had envisioned. Instead, the silence echoed, making the emptiness unbearable. He distanced himself from the few people who still tried to offer support. He couldn't bear to hear advice or comforting words. For him, nothing made sense without Lucas. The nights, once filled with business dinners and gala events, were now spent alone in his library, going through old photos of Lucas as a baby. Looking at those moments when he and his son still had a chance was both painful and comforting. Despite all his resources, the one thing Alexander couldn't buy was time lost. And he knew it. Every step he had taken away from Lucas, every decision that had pulled him further from his son, now weighed on him like an anchor in his soul. Meanwhile, the world around him kept moving. His business partners continued expanding the company, and his colleagues invited him to new opportunities. But Alexander felt frozen in time. Without Lucas, nothing mattered anymore. He was a man trapped between the past and his present pain, unable to find any path forward. Claire's life had completely changed since the day she found Lucas on that beach. Before, she led a frantic routine, juggling 2 jobs just to keep the bills paid. Now, with the responsibility of raising a small boy, her priorities had shifted dramatically. She had to give up one of her jobs, sacrificing a portion of her income to dedicate herself fully to Lucas. Although financial struggles were constant, Claire never regretted her decision. Lucas, on the other hand, was blossoming every day. The boy she had found so fragile and frightened was beginning to show signs of joy, adapting to his new life with Claire. He still couldn't remember his past, but he seemed to find comfort in the simplicity and care that Claire provided. She taught him to appreciate the small things, like their morning walks along the beach, the sound of the ocean, and the gentle breeze that refreshed their faces. These moments created a strong bond between them. As time passed, Lucas began to engage more, asking questions and showing curiosity about the world around him. He displayed a surprising intelligence, especially with technology. Claire didn't know how, but Lucas seemed to have a natural talent with anything electronic he touched. Sometimes she would find him taking apart and putting back together household devices with a precision that left her astonished. She often wondered where these skills came from, but never questioned too much. She was just grateful to watch him grow and learn by her side. However, raising Lucas wasn't easy. Claire faced many sleepless nights, trying to balance work and motherhood, all while dealing with Lucas's frequent nightmares. He would wake up crying, muttering confused words, sometimes calling out for someone Claire couldn't identify. She held him, trying to comfort him, but she knew that the memories buried deep in his mind still haunted him. Even so, she never gave up. The financial struggles weighed heavily on Claire. The small village where they lived offered few job opportunities, and Claire struggled to find a way to improve her situation without sacrificing time with Lucas. She saved every penny, always putting Lucas's well-being first. Bills piled up, but Claire faced each day with determination, reminding herself that Lucas needed her. No matter how hard it was, she knew she was doing the right thing. Slowly, the local community grew fond of Lucas. He became known as the boy from the beach, and his rescue story with Claire touched everyone's hearts. People offered help in small ways, donating clothes and toys their own children had outgrown. Although it wasn't much, each act of kindness reinforced Claire's belief that, despite all the challenges, she and Lucas were not alone. Even though Claire didn't know who Lucas truly was, she began to accept that he might never remember his past. She wasn't sure if anyone was still looking for him, and the lack of answers led her to believe that fate had placed him in her path for a reason. She became the mother he needed, caring for him with all the love and dedication she could offer, while trying to give him a simple but love-filled life. Still, deep in her heart, Claire knew that one day the truth would come to light. Until then, she was determined to create a home where Lucas could feel safe and loved, even though the future remained uncertain. What she didn't know was that the wheels of fate were already in motion, preparing for a reunion that would change their lives forever. After years of struggles and uncertainty, Claire made an important decision. She and Lucas needed a new opportunity. The small village was too limited, and job opportunities were scarce. She wanted more for Lucas, especially now that he was growing and showing an impressive talent for technology. So, with a mix of hope and nervousness, Claire decided to move to a larger city in search of new possibilities. The move was challenging. With limited resources, Claire rented a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. The first few days were filled with uncertainty, but Claire was determined to give Lucas a better future. Soon, she landed a job as an assistant at a local company, which happened to be part of Alexander Walker's vast tech empire. Claire had no idea that fate was already aligning their paths in an unexpected way. Lucas, on the other hand, seemed to adapt quickly to the new environment. He was growing fast, and although he still had few memories of his past, he showed a curiosity and talent far beyond his age. While Claire worked, he spent hours exploring new devices, taking apart and reassembling electronics with a skill that impressed even the adults around him. Sometimes Claire watched him and wondered where this almost innate ability came from. It was on one of these days, while Claire was busy with her new job, that Alexander Walker crossed paths with Lucas for the first time. Alexander, now running his businesses with even greater intensity, had become a near recluse. Since Lucas's disappearance, he had thrown himself into work obsessively, trying to fill the void left by his son. But despite all his success, nothing could ease the pain he felt. The guilt and remorse followed him with every decision he made, every project he signed. He had become a distant spectator in his own life. While walking through the halls of his company's headquarters during an unplanned visit, Alexander noticed Lucas. The boy was sitting in a corner playing with a tablet that one of the employees had left on the table. What caught Alexander's attention wasn't just Lucas's skill with the device, but something deeper, something he couldn't quite explain. There was something about the boy that made him stop in his tracks. Alexander watched the boy for a few moments, feeling an unsettling sense of familiarity. The boy's features, the way he moved his hands as he worked on the tablet, it stirred memories that Alexander had tried to bury. He slowly approached, still confused about why he felt this strange connection. "You like technology?" Alexander asked, trying to sound casual. Lucas looked up at him and smiled without hesitation. "Yes, I like figuring out how things work." The simplicity of the answer touched something in Alexander. He knelt beside the boy and observed what he was doing with the tablet. The precision with which Lucas navigated the menus and explored the tablet's functions was impressive for a boy his age. Alexander felt a tightness in his chest. Something about that smile, that genuine curiosity, reminded him of his own son, Lucas. As he continued to watch the boy, Alexander noticed something else, a small scar on Lucas's arm. His heart raced. He recognized that scar. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but it was the same one his son had gotten after falling in the garden when he was only 2 years old. Time seemed to stand still as Alexander tried to process what he was seeing. Could it be possible? Feeling a rush of confused emotions, Alexander abruptly stood up, unsure how to handle the whirlwind of feelings that flooded him. The boy returned to playing with the tablet, unaware of the impact his presence had on Alexander. Something inside Alexander told him he needed to find out more about this boy. His instincts pulled him toward the truth, but the fear of facing the past held him back. Yet he couldn't shake the idea that perhaps, just perhaps, this boy held the key to something he thought he had lost forever. Alexander left the building feeling shaken. The image of that boy, the smile, the scar, kept echoing in his mind, fueling a hope he had buried years ago. He knew he couldn't ignore the feeling that gripped him, even though part of him resisted believing in the impossible. Determined to follow his instincts, Alexander began to investigate discreetly. First, he asked his assistants to gather information about the boy's family. Who was his mother? Where had they come from? These questions swirled in his mind, but he needed concrete answers before confronting any painful truths. Within hours, Alexander learned that the woman caring for the boy, Claire, wasn't his biological mother. Claire had found Lucas on a beach years ago and had been raising him as her own ever since. The story of the lost boy deeply moved Alexander. The details aligned too perfectly. He knew he had to confirm the truth, no matter how terrifying it was. Armed with the information he needed, Alexander decided to confront Claire. He had spent too much time away from the truth, and if that boy really was his son, he couldn't continue living with uncertainty. The next day, Alexander arrived at Claire's home, unsure of how he would be received. He rang the doorbell, his heart pounding in his chest. Claire answered the door, surprised to see such an imposing and unfamiliar man standing on her doorstep. "Can I help you?" she asked, clearly confused. "My name is Alexander Walker," he began, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need to talk to you about Lucas." The mention of Lucas's name brought a flash of alertness to Claire's eyes. Her stomach turned. "What about Lucas?" Her voice was cautious, defensive. Alexander took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what he was about to say. "I think Lucas might be my missing son." The words fell into the air like a bomb. Claire felt the ground shift beneath her. Her heart raced. How could this be true? Lucas was her son, the boy she had found on the beach, the boy she had raised with so much love. But at the same time, she knew Lucas had a mysterious past, a past even he couldn't remember. Alexander continued, seeing the confusion in Claire's eyes. "Years ago, my son disappeared in a tragic accident at sea. All I know is that he was never found. Until now. When I saw Lucas, something told me he was my son. The scar on his arm. It's the same one my son had. I can't ignore that." Claire stared at Alexander, the shock clear on her face. Everything was starting to make sense. The unanswered questions, Lucas's amnesia, the absence of any family looking for him, it all pointed to the possibility that Alexander was telling the truth. I didn't know," Claire murmured, feeling the weight of reality crash down on her. Claire's heart ached as she processed Alexander's words. The idea that Lucas wasn't truly her son hit her like a blow. But at the same time, she knew that the man standing at her door carried an old and deep pain, the same pain Lucas had silently borne since the day she found him. Alexander kept talking, trying to explain. He told Claire about the cruise, the accident, the desperate search, and the guilt that had consumed him ever since. His story made sense. Everything seemed to fit, but that didn't make the situation any less devastating for Claire. She had raised Lucas as her own for years, sacrificing everything for him, and now it felt as though fate was about to rip him away. "I didn't know he had a family. I did everything I could to find them, but no one ever came," Claire said, her voice trembling. "He's all I have now." The silence between them was heavy, filled with conflicting emotions. Alexander saw the pain in Claire's eyes, but he also knew she had done nothing but love and care for his son. He thought about all the nights he had blamed himself for losing Lucas, all the chances he had missed to be present in his son's life. Now, standing before the woman who had filled the void he had left, Alexander knew he had to make a decision. "I don't want to take him away from you," Alexander finally said, his voice full of regret. "You've been the mother I never could be. If Lucas is okay today, it's because of you." Claire looked at him, surprised. "So, what are you going to do?" she asked, her heart heavy, fearing the worst. Alexander sighed, feeling the weight of years of guilt and sorrow begin to lift. "I want him to stay with you," he said firmly. "I lost my son once because I didn't know how to value what truly mattered. I'm not going to make the same mistake again. But, if you're willing, I'd like to be part of his life." Tears filled Claire's eyes. It was as if the burden she had carried was finally being shared. Alexander, with all his mistakes and flaws, was offering them all a chance at something new, a chance for healing, forgiveness, and redemption. Months had passed since the day Alexander found Lucas again. The lives of Claire, Lucas, and Alexander had changed in ways none of them could have predicted. What once seemed like an irreversible tragedy had transformed into a second chance for everyone. Claire still cared for Lucas, as she always had, but now there was a different presence in their lives. Alexander began visiting regularly, at first cautiously, always respecting the boundaries of both Lucas and Claire. Over time, however, a new family dynamic started to take shape. Lucas, who gradually began remembering fragments of his past, accepted Alexander naturally, without rushing. It wasn't an easy transition. Alexander knew he had to earn back the right to be called Dad, but each step forward with his son was a personal victory. As time passed, Lucas came to understand that he had two homes, two people who loved him unconditionally. Alexander and Claire, despite their vastly different backgrounds, found a balance. It wasn't the life Alexander had once imagined, but he finally realized that true wealth wasn't in his business success or the control he held over his company. The greatest value lay in the connections he had built with the people around him, his son and Claire, who had shown him what it meant to love without expecting anything in return. Claire, too, discovered a newfound strength within herself. She had always been a fighter, but now, with Alexander's emotional support and knowing Lucas was loved by both of them, she felt more complete. The fear of losing Lucas had been replaced by gratitude, knowing that she had not only found a home for the boy, but also for herself. The three of them began a new life together, forming a unique dynamic. Alexander became an integral part of Lucas's life, but never took away Claire's role as his mother. They learned to share the responsibility, and most importantly, the love they both had for that boy. Their story wasn't a typical one, but it taught them all a powerful lesson. Even in the most difficult circumstances, love, forgiveness, and resilience can transform lives and create new opportunities for happiness.